breakfast.
Good morning and welcome to Comics for Breakfast. I'm your host, Jason MINK. If I learned anything growing up in the 1970s, it's that it was important to be cool. I mean, consider the popular role models of the time. You had Cool Hand Luke, Joe Cool, and the king of cool himself, Arthur Fonzarelli. I mean, it was pretty cut and dried, really. Cool was obvious, and uncool, well, you couldn't miss that either. When your choices were Kiss or the Bay City Rollers, no one really needed to draw you a roadmap. Uncool things just seemed to stand in sharp contrast to their betters. They might feel slightly dated or out of style. The production itself may be subpar with colors duller and details muted. Nowhere did this seem more apparent than in comic books. While Marvel or DC could usually be counted on to at least deliver a slick and professional-looking product with recognizable characters, smaller comics publishers found themselves hamstrung by questionable properties, poor quality materials, and production tools. Hold a Marvel book up to, say, a Charlton of the same period, and the differences are clear. The inks are blotchy, with a tendency to travel all over the place. The colors seem dull, with details indistinct and fuzzy. Even the paper is a step down, with obvious bits of pulp and rough corners. It's easy to see why a kid might turn his nose up at these books. But is there more to these books than meets the eye? The answer is a resounding yes. Our first book is from Gold Key, a publisher who seemed to radiate wholesomeness and gentility. Indeed, Gold Keys were so seemingly inoffensive they didn't even bear the Comics Code, which was all but mandatory on books at the time. But hey, how could the code find issues with such inoffensive fare as Wacky Witch, Oh Gee Whiz, and Baby Snoots? Now, as a kid, Gold Key seemed pretty toothless, but I had no idea that just a few years before my time, they published a comic based on something that I thought was pretty cool indeed. It was, of course, Dark Shadows. Based on the long-running Gothic soap opera, Dark Shadows featured moldering mansions, murderous werewolves, and, most importantly, the uncanny presence of vampire Barnabas Collins. Now, if you're thinking, wait a second, Gold Key did that? You wouldn't be alone. They seem like an unlikely publisher for such a subject, but Gold Key had a long history of licensing television and film properties. They were more than happy to produce a comic based on such a popular franchise, leaving Marvel and DC to focus on their own brands. So, how does the comic compare to the show? Let's find out. Our story begins with this eye-popping splash page. No, take a second. There's a lot to unpack. Cut to Lenore, Elizabeth, and Quentin Collins enjoying a day out on the water. Well, the girls are enjoying it anyway, as Quentin is preoccupied with the thought of a missing local teenager. Liz assures him that the girl probably just ran off to Hollywood to be a starlet or something, but our sometimes werewolf isn't so sure. The trio head back to town, where they're captivated by Granny Bumper's dollhouse. Check it out. There's like a skadillion dolls in there. And here's Granny now. The gang is treated to some puppety shenanigans, with Lenore deciding she needs some of this nightmare fuel for her own. Granny balks at this. These are her special clown puppets, I guess. The kid puts in a standing order for a set, but just so she doesn't go home empty-handed, she's given this charming witch puppet. Before Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop can show up, we slip away to the basement of Collinwood, where an introspective Barnabas remembers the witch Angelique and how she cursed him with vampirism. Hang on to that, it'll be important later. Back to town, where Elizabeth is trying to buy some lamb chops for dinner. However, the stereotypical butcher can't help her, as his son has run off in the night, presumably with the missing girl mentioned earlier. As you can see, father and son share a fairly complex relationship. Back at Collinswood, Hepzibah the witch hates tuna casserole. And who could blame her? Dinner is interrupted by the doorbell. Hey, it's those puppets Lenore commissioned. That's some turnaround. I can't even get a pizza delivered that quickly. The kid is sent to bed, the puppets are set aside, and Barnabas and Quentin talk over recent events. Barney is certain there's more to the story than meets the eye and heads off to investigate. Upstairs, Liz leaves the dolls where Lenore can find them in the morning, but the witch puppet has other ideas. She calls out to the other puppets, which eerily rise from their box. Their outer shells abruptly split open, revealing there are, in fact, tiny people inside. The pair follow the witch puppet's prompts, gathering tools from around the room. Across town, Quentin decides to investigate the creepy dollmaker. Granny Bumpers has the lad in and gives him some nice drug tea, which knocks him out long enough to imprison him in this enormous cage. However, upon further investigation, Quentin discovers it's not the cage what's huge, but him who's gone all tiny. Even better, Sylvester here has noticed this curious new addition and decides to see what Quentin tastes like. A swatting paw drops the cage to the floor, freeing our hero, but allowing the cat the chance to attack. Back at Collinswood, Barnabas goes back to bed, and who could blame him? He's clearly not in this story this much. However, those mischievous little people have been busy amassing the tools of destruction. Back at Granny Bumpers, a stray ray of moonlight breaks through the curtains, effecting a startling change. Transformed once again into a werewolf, Quentin bites the cat, sending the feline flying off into the darkness. Wait, does this mean it's now a werecat? Imagine working for the ASPCA and having to field that call. Mini Quentin then makes his way to Granny's spellbook, where he finds the spell that was used to make him fun-sized. But where is the antidote? Meanwhile, back at Collinswood, the wee people creep into Barnabas's Colin and prepare to stake the vampire's heart with a number 2 pencil. Hey, adopt, adapt, and improve. Luckily, a resized Quentwolf runs in just then to put a stop to the stakey proceedings. Ouch! That's gotta hoit! Using his coat, Quentin catches the fleeing pair, pondering just what to do with them. If returned to normal size, they could spill the beans on he and Barnabas, but what's he going to do with 2 tiny teenagers otherwise? He administers the serum, and a startling change occurs, the kids reverting back to normal size. And, as luck would have it, why, they don't remember a thing. That's teenagers for you. Back at Granny Bumpy's, Quentin confronts the aged puppetress. He's tumbled her game. She's not a plump octogenarian at all, but that wicked ghost, Angelique. Remember from earlier? Yeah, it all ties together, leading to the reambiguated kids returning to their parents, Angelique returning to the ether, and Barnabas getting a good day's sleep. As much fun as the story might be, one can imagine a young reader might have felt a little burned by this. Yes, it does have both a vampire and a werewolf in it, but they're acting in decidedly unscary ways. Other than Barnabas sleeping in a coffin, well, he doesn't really do much vampire stuff, and the werewolf is more or less comics relief. That said, depictions of such creatures were still verboten in mainstream comics, where Morbius was forced to be a living vampire. So I guess even lame monsters are better than no monsters. American publishing company Charlton Comics existed from 1945 until 1986. In its 4 decades of existence, Charlton published a wide variety of genres, including crime, horror, romance, science fiction, and Western comics. The company was known for its low-budget practices, often using unpublished material acquired from defunct companies and paying comics creators some of the lowest rates in the industry. Charlton was unique among comic book companies in that it controlled all areas of publishing, from editorial to printing to distribution, rather than working with outside printers and distributors as most other publishers did. However, by the 1970s, after 4 decades of relative success, things were winding down for the company. Desperate for more sales avenues, Charlton created the Modern Comics imprint, which saw the company reprint older books, which it would bag in threes and sell at discount and retail stores. Creepy Things number 4 is just such a book. And right off the bat, dig that groovy Tom Sutton painted cover. Images like this are what first grabbed me when I began stumbling across these books in the dollar bins. The post-1960s fusion of psychedelia and horror was brief but memorable. The melty shapes and bleeding colors suggestive of a bad nightmare or a good acid trip. Unlike the more literal Hollywood-style monsters, these sort of covers are far more intense and subversive. Indeed, artists like Tom Sutton worked for Charlton specifically because they were given the freedom to follow their muse. You say Creepy Things needs a cover this month? Well, here you go. There wasn't a bunch of editorial grousing or second-guessing from management. After all, they had comics to put out. In our first story, the mutant, Lieutenant Alan Brill and his wife are speeding through the countryside when a giant insect splatters on their windshield. What's even worse, there are more of them. A blast of CO2 from a handy fire extinguisher dispatches the buzzing invader, but in the process, the car is driven off the road, leaving the pair stranded. They begin to hoof it up the hill, but just then something breaks from the shadows. It's an enormous rat. But before Michael Jackson can get all sentimental about it, Alan blasts the oversized rodent with his hand cannon. And hey, he's done gone killed the scientist's pet. It took him months to plump this rat. This is Dr. Mosley, and he's all about radiation, using the deadly energy to enlarge living creatures. Check out this giant bat. The doctor leads the pair behind a powerful electric fence and into his lab, trapping them in a glass-walled room by telling them there's a telephone inside. Man, if only there was some way they could have looked into it first, huh? The doc gasses his guests, then straps them to operating tables. Reviving, Alan tries to make a deal for their lives, but the doc has taken the loss of his rat seriously and goes ahead with his sinister plans. 3 days pass with startling results. The radiation has mutated Alan and Judy nicely, giving them big old monster heads. Oh, and a taste for bloody vengeance as well, as they soon rise and attack the doctor in his lab. Fleeing in terror, the doc stumbles across a giant worm, I guess he forgot about, which makes short work of him. Driven towards the sounds of his screaming, the irradiated Alan and Judy electrocute themselves on the fence, putting a capper on this nasty little number. In Bookworm, we meet millionaire Abner Creasy. Despite his wealth, Creasy is a petty man. He browbeats the bookseller into a discount over this old notebook, then makes his way home, presumably to swim in his basement full of gold coins. On the way there, he runs into the children of his former business partner, returning from their father's funeral. On his deathbed, old Conrad forgave Creasy for bilking him out of his share of the business, but Creasy is unmoved. He heads back to his personal library, where he obsesses over his own mortality. Deciding to put his life story down on paper, the millionaire opens his new notebook and begins to write, but the process leaves him transparent. Creasy rushes to confront the bookseller. Seems that particular notebook was cursed. You know the sort, one of those notebooks that absorbs the body and soul of whoever writes in it. I think Mead makes them. The mysterious book will trap the writer, sealing itself until someone new comes along and opens the cover, releasing the victim. Creasy decides maybe this isn't such a bad thing after all. The book will hold his essence, preserving it until someone can come along and free him. He quickly finishes writing his story, and, the process complete, the book slams shut, Creasy vanishing into the pages. Content in the knowledge he's beaten the Reaper, Creasy relaxes, but a strange sound soon catches his attention. It appears the tome is infested with bookworms, leading to this ironic denouement. Man's Best Friend is the book's final tale, immersively illustrated by the aforementioned Tom Sutton. A shadowy figure steps out of the rain/night into the musty confines of Mr. Weaver's pet store. It's a wealthy dowager type on the hunt for a miniature dachshund, but Weaver is fresh out. The two exchange harsh words before Weaver exiles her from his store. He has no use for her petty business when he has regular customers to serve. Ah, here comes one now. This Tomb of Ligeia reject is looking for one of Weaver's special pets, the murdery kind. Oh yes, yes, come right this way. The shopkeep leads his customer into the moldering bowels of the building where hideous creatures snarl and slash from behind the bars of their cages. But what to choose? There's a giant snail and Ed Wood-style octopus, plus stacks of werewolves and cat creatures. Man, I thought feeding one pet was expensive. The customer, now unsettled, presses on, stopping before the most Lovecraftian horror of them all. And this is the one, as they say, the customer carting the squamulous mass off into the night. Content, Weaver heads back inside to close the store, but someone waits for him there. He, too, wishes to purchase one of Weaver's pets, but isn't nearly so picky, gladly taking a vampire bat before shuffling away. However, it's just a few hours later, and the bat comes back, now trained to kill. Turns out one of Weaver's werewolves killed last week was this guy's long-lost brother. Whoops! And dig this final panel. Pretty grisly, but hey, don't worry, it's Comics Code approved. Fun, freaky stuff. Unlike many old comics in 2021, these modern books are still easy and affordable additions to any comic collection. If you missed the Charlton versions the first time around, these reprints make for great reading, especially with Halloween creeping up. Highly recommended. We're going to wrap this episode up with Whitman's The Occult Files of Dr. Spectre. Now, who is Dr. Spectre, you may ask? Well, let me get who was Whitman out of the way first. Whitman is essentially Gold Key, which was an imprint of Western Publishing, a company that operated from 1962 to 1984. Much like Charlton and Modern, products bearing the Whitman logo were sold in bags of 3 in retail outlets like gas stations or grocery stores. Okay, so who is Dr. Spectre? A creation of writer Donald F. Glut and artist Dan Spiegel, Dr. Spectre is an occult detective. The character first appeared in Mystery Comics Digest number 5 from July of 1972 before graduating to his own title a year later. Alongside of his beautiful and talented assistant Lakota, the good doctor investigates paranormal phenomena, battles monsters, and, I assume, blasts Blue Oyster Cult 8 tracks in his Plymouth Fury. Let's find out. In the darkness of a secret cavern, Karina the Witch communes with occult forces intent on destroying Dr. Adam Spectre. To do so, they must first subjugate his will, a task the beautiful witch is well suited to. She steps into the mystical mirror and vanishes. Elsewhere, a sudden storm lashes the car of Dr. Spectre as he and his assistant, Lakota Rainflower, return home from their regular Wednesday night ESP meeting. Through the rain, a mysterious figure appears, beckoning the passing car. The doc, being a good egg, picks up this enigmatic hitchhiker who introduces herself to a wrapped Spectre and a now cold-as-ice Lakota. All head back to the manor to dry off, where Doc proceeds to talk himself up. He's clearly captivated by his guest, a fact that quickly becomes apparent. Drawn to her side, Spectre embraces the enchanting stranger, giving her an unexpectedly passionate kiss. It is then Lakota returns with hot tea, but rushes off when she witnesses all the canoodling. Adam races after her to explain. He feels he's fallen under some sort of spell, but the skeptical Lakota calls bullshit on that. The pair return to the parlor, but Karina has gone, leaving only her mirror behind. Later that night, Spectre dreams of the ginger-tressed witch. Indeed, she is in his thoughts all of the next day. Unable to work, he retrieves her mirror, but is caught once again by Lakota. Spectre lashes out at his assistant. He's in love with Karina, and Lakota just needs to deal with it. The doc stalks off, leaving Lakota to silently mourn. Following a compulsion, Spectre drives up to Mount Algol, to a cave allegedly haunted by evil spirits. And the doc should know, as the last time he was here, he encountered the Dark Gods. Within the cave waits Karina, resplendent on a regal throne-like chair. After a big old smooch, she explains to Spectre they are to be married, forever after serving Karina's masters, the Dark Gods. The doc understandably takes issue with this, so Karina whips up some party guests to help convince him. There's Ra-Kahep, the mummy, Mr. Hyde, and the vampiric Baron Tybor, with no less than the Frankenstein monster as backup. One by one, the creatures attack Spectre, with Hyde viciously striking with his cane, before being laid out by a good old-fashioned sock to the jaw. However, he and the mummy pull this classic move, sending the doc ass over teakettle. Recovering, Spectre is seized by the Frankenstein monster, but some quick thinking and a nearby torch sees him struggle free. No matter, as Baron Tybor in bat form comes shrieking in, fangs and claws bared. As one, the monsters bundle their prey up and toss him into the bottomless pit. Hanging on, Spectre gets the shock of his life when he looks up to see Lakota has joined the evil charge. It seems she, too, now serves the evil gods, bringing a sandaled foot cruelly down on the doc's grasping hand. However, the sight of his former assistant clears Spectre's mind. Convinced now all of this is an illusion, he forces the spell to break through sheer will alone. Having failed to defeat Spectre, the Dark Gods turn on their charge, stealing Karina's beauty and youth. Now an aged hag, she flips her wig and rushes off into the shadows, tumbling into the nearby pit. The Dark Gods then bring the cave down around our hero, who only narrowly escapes. Spectre rushes back to the manor in the hopes of catching up to Lakota, only she is not there. His heartbreak is short-lived, however, as his assistant suddenly appears in the doorway. Looks like she knows Doc better than he knows himself. With things suddenly seeming a lot sunnier, Spectre takes Lakota out for a night on the town. Only it's morning. I guess they go to Denny's. The Occult Files of Dr. Spectre ran for 24 issues. Although little noted at the time, the book has come to be considered a classic, in large part due to Don Glut's terrific writing. The Good Doctor is a remarkably developed and nuanced character, exhibiting traits like compassion, empathy, and a willingness to sacrifice himself for the betterment of others. Unlike other shoot-first-and-ask-questions-later monster hunter types, Spectre tries to help the monsters he encounters. At one point, he actually cures vampirism. Not too bad. Dan Spiegel's artwork is a perfect complement to Glut's writing, his beautiful line work and masterful composition magnifying the already intense atmosphere. If you like the look of this book but despair at tracking copies of it down, fear not, as the entire series has been reprinted. It's well worth your time if you're a fan of the horror genre or just good comics in general. While I was foolish enough to pass on these books the first time based on some knee-jerk reaction, well, I have to say I've learned my lesson. As Homer Simpson once sagely stated, maybe if you're truly cool, you don't need to be told you're cool. And these books certainly don't need validation from me. Great art and stories are cool no matter where they come from. If you look hard enough, they may just come to you. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider purchasing a mug, a t-shirt, or one of the other fine items that you can only find in the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics swag shop. I'm Jason Mink, and I hope to see you next Sunday at breakfast.